Most people believe healing happens when we do something, when we solve the problem, fix the situation, or finally understand everything that went wrong. But what if the beginning of healing is much quieter than that? What if it begins not with action, but with a moment of stillness most people try to avoid? There's a strange habit many of us share. The moment life grows quiet, we reach for something to fill it. A screen, a task, a distraction. Silence can feel uncomfortable, almost like standing in a room where something important might appear. So we keep moving, keep scrolling, keep busy, not realizing that the very silence we avoid might be the place where healing waits. Because beneath all the noise of daily life, every person carries a small inner space, a place where unspoken feelings rest quietly. Disappointment, loneliness, memories we never fully processed. And just like an abandoned garden, that inner space doesn't stop growing simply because we stop visiting it. It waits patiently, waiting for someone to finally slow down and step inside. In this story, you'll meet a man who spent years running from those quiet moments, not because he was weak, but because he didn't yet understand what silence was trying to offer him. It took an unexpected garden and a very patient mentor to show him that stillness is not emptiness at all. It's the beginning of gentle repair. And somewhere inside his simple discovery lies something most people forget. A small practice, barely longer than a minute, that can soften the heaviest thoughts and reconnect you with a quiet strength already within you. But first, we have to step through the gate he once avoided. There are moments in the day when the noise fades almost by accident. The phone rests face down, the room grows quieter, and the air seems to pause for a breath. For many people, those moments feel strangely uncomfortable. Not frightening exactly, just a little too still. So the mind quickly reaches for something, a screen, a task, a distraction. It's curious how silence can feel heavier than noise. A person may spend an entire day surrounded by activity, conversation, music, notifications. Yet the moment the world grows quiet, something inside begins to stir. Thoughts appear that weren't invited. Memories drift in like unannounced guests. Most people learn, slowly and unconsciously, how to avoid those guests. They fill empty spaces with busy hands and restless schedules. The calendar becomes crowded, the mind even more so. From the outside, it looks like productivity. From the inside, it sometimes feels like running. Because quiet moments have a way of revealing things that noise politely hides. A sharp word someone said last week, the ache of being misunderstood, the loneliness that appears after a room empties. Little wounds that never quite received attention, so people keep moving, hoping movement will smooth those feelings away. And for a while, it works, or at least it seems to. The days pass, full and loud and fast, but underneath all that motion, something patient remains, something waiting. Imagine for a moment a small garden behind an old house. From the street, the house looks lively and well kept, but behind the fence, the garden hasn't been visited for a long time. Weeds curl around the flowers that once grew there. The soil waits quietly, holding stories no one has heard. The strange thing about gardens like that is they don't shout for attention. They simply sit there in silence, waiting for someone to open the gate, waiting for a pair of hands to kneel beside the soil again, waiting for a little care. And perhaps the human heart isn't so different. Behind busy days and constant motion, there's often a quiet inner garden, a place where feelings grow wild when ignored. A place many people avoid visiting, because they're not quite sure what they might find there. Yet there's a gentle question that sometimes appears in the stillness. Not loud, not demanding, just soft and patient. What if the quiet we keep escaping is actually the doorway to tending that forgotten garden? And what if healing begins the moment someone finally steps inside? Not far from that quiet garden lived a man named Elias, though most people simply knew him as the one who was always busy. His days were filled with movement. Small tasks, long errands, constant motion. If there was a moment of silence, he'd quickly find something to fill it. A chair to fix, a message to answer, a room to rearrange. Anything that kept the stillness from lingering too long. To others, it seemed admirable. Elias never stops, neighbors would say with a hint of approval. But if someone watched carefully, they might notice something else. Whenever the world grew quiet, his shoulders stiffened slightly, as though silence carried a question he didn't want to hear. One evening, after a particularly long day, Elias sat on the back steps of his house. The air was cool, the sky dimming into soft shades of blue and gray. For once, there was nothing left to do. No tools in his hands, no voices around him, just the gentle hush of evening. At first, the quiet felt strange. His mind started searching for something, anything, to occupy it. But the garden behind him caught his eye. That old, forgotten patch of earth he hadn't visited in years. Weeds tangled through the broken fence like quiet reminders. He almost stood up to go back inside, almost reached for some task to avoid the view. Yet something about the garden held him there. Not accusing, not demanding, just waiting. Like an old friend who hadn't given up hope. It struck him then, in a quiet sort of way, that the garden had never been the problem. The soil hadn't rejected him. The weeds hadn't grown out of spite. They simply filled the space where care had been absent. Nature, after all, doesn't like emptiness. And perhaps the same was true for the human heart. When attention disappears, other things grow in its place. Unspoken sadness, unprocessed disappointment, feelings that never had a moment to breathe. Elias leaned back on the wooden step and sighed softly. For the first time in a long while, he didn't rush to fix the feeling. He simply sat there for a moment, just one slow breath. And strangely enough, that single quiet breath didn't feel like emptiness. It felt spacious. The thought arrived gently, like a breeze moving through leaves. Maybe silence wasn't an enemy after all. Maybe those quiet moments were something else entirely. A small sanctuary the heart had been trying to enter all along. A place where things that were tired inside him might finally begin to mend. But Elias wasn't quite ready to believe that yet. The garden behind the house was still tangled with weeds, and somewhere within him, deeper than he cared to admit, there were parts of his own inner garden that had never been touched by quiet hands. Parts he would soon have to face. Elias had grown used to living at a certain speed. Not fast enough to seem frantic, just fast enough to avoid lingering. If a thought appeared that felt heavy, he'd sweep the floor. If a memory knocked at the door, he'd go for a walk. And if quiet lingered too long, well, there was always something else to do. Most people thought he simply had a hardworking nature. He was the neighbor who fixed things without being asked. The one who carried heavy boxes, repaired loose hinges, trimmed branches along the road. He always smiled, nodded, kept moving. Yet no one noticed how rarely he allowed himself to simply sit, because when Elias sat still, something stirred beneath the surface. A sentence someone once said that cut deeper than it should have. A moment of rejection he pretended not to care about. A quiet loneliness that arrived after gatherings ended. Little echoes the noise of daily life usually kept buried. He remembered one evening when a friend had laughed at something he shared. Not cruelly, perhaps, but enough to make his chest tighten. Elias had brushed it off with a quick joke of his own. Then he spent the rest of the night fixing a broken shelf in the garage. Wood, nails, movement. Safer companions than reflection. The truth was simple, though he rarely admitted it. Stopping felt dangerous. If he slowed down too much, emotions might rise like water behind a dam. Grief he hadn't named. Exhaustion he hadn't allowed himself to feel. So he kept moving through his days like a man sweeping leaves during a windy season. No matter how many he cleared away, more kept appearing. He convinced himself that constant effort was the only way forward. After all, if the ground stayed busy, maybe no one would notice the soil beneath. Maybe not even him. And yet, that garden behind his house told a quiet story he couldn't ignore forever. Weeds curling around forgotten stones. Dry soil waiting patiently under the tangled green. A wooden gate slightly crooked on its hinges. A place he hadn't entered in years. Sometimes he glanced toward it while walking past the back door. For a second, something inside him would pause. Not quite sadness, more like recognition. As if the garden and his heart shared a private understanding. Two spaces left unattended for too long. One evening, after another long day of keeping himself occupied, Elias stepped outside again. The air carried that familiar evening quiet, the kind that made thoughts grow louder. His eyes drifted once more toward the overgrown garden, and for the first time, he wondered what it might feel like to walk inside. The idea unsettled him a little, not because the garden looked frightening, but because he had a quiet suspicion. If he opened that old wooden gate, something within himself might open too. The next morning arrived softly, the way quiet mornings often do. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, touching the floor in pale golden squares. Elias stood with a cup of tea, staring toward the back door. He told himself he was just enjoying the morning air, but somehow his feet carried him outside. The garden looked the same as always, neglected, tangled, patient. Wild vines curled around the old wooden fence. Weeds rose proudly where flowers once grew, and the small stone path had nearly disappeared beneath layers of green. It was less a garden now, more a quiet wilderness. Elias approached the gate slowly, as if the place might notice him. The hinges groaned when he pushed it open, a soft protest after years of silence. He stepped inside, careful not to disturb too much. The air felt strangely still there, like entering a room where time had paused. For a moment, he simply stood there. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the fence. Leaves rustled gently in the breeze. And beneath the tangled weeds, he noticed something familiar, a row of stones he had once carefully placed with his own hands. He knelt down and brushed away some of the wild growth. The soil underneath was darker than he expected. Not dead, not ruined, just hidden. It had been waiting quietly all this time, waiting for someone to notice again. Elias chuckled softly to himself. "Well, look at you," he murmured toward the stubborn weeds. "They didn't waste any time, did they?" The garden, of course, offered no reply, but somehow its silence felt understanding rather than judgmental. It occurred to him that the garden wasn't broken at all. It had simply continued growing without guidance. Nature filling empty space the only way it knows how. Wildness appearing wherever care disappears. A quiet rule of the world. And as he sat there brushing dirt from the stones, another thought appeared. Maybe the heart works in much the same way. When attention fades, emotions don't disappear. They simply grow in tangled directions, unseen but very much alive. The weeds in front of him weren't enemies. They were signals. Little signs saying something here once mattered. Something worth tending again. Something still capable of blooming. Elias rested his hands on the soil and sighed quietly. He didn't start pulling weeds yet. He didn't rush to fix anything. For the first time, he simply sat in the garden's quiet company. And somewhere in that silence, the feeling arose that someone else might understand this place even better than he did. Elias returned to the garden the next afternoon, not with tools, just curiosity. The gate creaked again as he stepped inside, greeting him like an old door remembering a friend. He wandered along the half-hidden stone path, brushing leaves aside with his foot. The place still looked wild, yet something about it felt less intimidating today, almost as if the garden was quietly pleased to see him again. As he bent down to examine a patch of tangled stems, a soft voice drifted over the fence. "Gardens have a way of waiting longer than people expect." Elias straightened and turned, slightly startled. Leaning calmly against the fence was an older woman he'd seen around the neighborhood before. Her presence carried the unhurried ease of someone who didn't rush through days. Her name, he would soon learn, was Mira. She didn't step into the garden right away. Instead, she simply rested her hands on the fence rail, observing the wild greenery with a small, knowing smile. "Most people think weeds mean failure," she said gently, "but sometimes they just mean the soil hasn't been listened to in a while." Elias chuckled awkwardly, brushing dirt from his palms. "I suppose I've been busy." Mira nodded in a way that suggested she understood far more than the sentence revealed. "Busy can be useful," she said softly, "but busy can also be very good at hiding things." The breeze moved through the tall weeds between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Mira seemed perfectly comfortable with the silence, which felt unusual to Elias. Most people filled quiet spaces quickly. She didn't seem to feel the need. After a while, she stepped through the gate and walked slowly along the stone path. Her movements were calm, almost ceremonial. She crouched beside one stubborn cluster of weeds and gently parted them with her fingers. Beneath them, a tiny green sprout reached toward the light. "See that?" she said, smiling faintly. The garden never forgot how to grow. She covered the sprout lightly again, careful not to disturb it too much. "Sometimes healing doesn't need force," she added. "It only needs a little quiet attention." Elias watched her hands move through the soil with surprising patience. No rush, no urgency, no frustration, just presence. The kind of presence that made even the wind seem softer. He realized something then that felt almost strange. Mira didn't seem bothered by the weeds at all. If anything, she looked at them the way one might look at a long story that hadn't finished unfolding. And somehow, standing there beside her, Elias wondered if silence itself might be part of the healing. Elias returned to the garden the next morning, half expecting Mira to be there again. Sure enough, she was sitting quietly on a small wooden stool near the fence. No tools beside her, no sense of urgency. Just her hands resting loosely in her lap and her eyes calmly observing the tangled plants, as if the garden itself were speaking and she had learned how to listen. "Good morning," she said with a warm nod. Elias greeted her and stepped carefully onto the stone path. For a moment he felt the familiar urge to start fixing things immediately. Pull weeds, clear the soil, restore order. But Mira raised a gentle finger, smiling slightly. "Before we change anything," she said, "let's just notice what's here." She gestured toward the patch of soil between them. "Gardens don't like to be rushed, and neither do hearts." The sentence landed softly, yet it lingered in the air. They both crouched down near the same cluster of weeds from yesterday. Mira placed her hand lightly on the soil, not digging, just resting. "Quiet does something interesting," she continued. "It allows what's buried to rise slowly to the surface." Her voice was calm, like someone describing a sunrise. Elias frowned thoughtfully. "So the weeds, they're not the problem." Mira shook her head with a small laugh. "Oh, the weeds are honest. They grow wherever attention disappears." She brushed a leaf aside with surprising tenderness. "What really helps a garden," she said, "is presence. Not force, not frustration, not rushing to make it perfect, just quiet moments spent here, noticing what's alive beneath the surface, the kind of attention that doesn't demand immediate results, the kind that gives life room to breathe again." Then she picked up a small weed between her fingers. Instead of yanking it quickly, she loosened the soil around it first. Her movements were slow, patient, almost respectful. After a moment, the root slipped out easily. No struggle at all. "See?" she said gently, holding it up. "When the soil softens, things release on their own." She dropped the weed beside the path and brushed her hands together. Feelings work much the same way. Elias watched her, quiet now. She invited him to try something simple. "Close your eyes for a moment," she suggested. Just one slow breath. He hesitated, then did it, breathing in, breathing out. Nothing dramatic happened, yet the garden felt calmer somehow. When he opened his eyes again, Mira smiled kindly. "Quiet isn't emptiness," she said softly. "It's where the roots loosen." Elias glanced around the tangled garden, sensing that something deeper was beginning to shift inside him. Over the following days, Elias began visiting the garden each morning. Not with a grand plan, not with a list of tasks. Just a few quiet minutes before the day gathered its usual noise. Sometimes Mira was there, sometimes she wasn't. But the stillness she had introduced seemed to remain. At first, the quiet felt awkward. He would stand among the tall weeds, unsure what to do with his hands. His mind wandered quickly, jumping from memory to memory. A comment someone made last year. A disappointment he thought he'd already forgotten. Mira had once said something that stayed with him. Let the feelings pass through like wind in tall grass. So Elias tried exactly that. When a heavy thought appeared, he didn't chase it away. He simply took one slow breath and noticed it. Sometimes he would kneel and loosen a patch of soil for a minute or two, not rushing to clear the entire garden, just gently turning the dirt with his fingers. It became a small ritual. Breathe, loosen the soil, notice what's there. Nothing more complicated than that. On one particular morning, he uncovered a tiny cluster of flowers hidden beneath the weeds. Pale blue petals, delicate but determined. Elias laughed softly under his breath. "Well, you've been patient, haven't you?" The flowers seemed to nod in the morning breeze. Strangely enough, something inside him felt lighter too. Not because every problem had disappeared, but because he wasn't running quite as fast anymore. Some memories surfaced, softened, and quietly drifted away, like weeds whose roots had finally loosened. One afternoon, while clearing a narrow section of the stone path, Elias paused suddenly. A familiar feeling had risen in his chest, the sting of an old rejection. Normally, he would have pushed it aside immediately. Instead, he rested his hands on the soil and took one slow breath, just like Mira had shown him. The feeling stayed for a moment, then shifted slightly. Less sharp now, more like a passing cloud. He brushed away a few weeds and uncovered another stone on the path. The garden looked different already, not perfect, but alive. The same could be said for something inside him. Later that day, Mira returned and looked around the garden with quiet approval. "You see?" she said gently. "Nothing here needed force." Elias nodded slowly, realizing that the garden wasn't the only place beginning to heal. And yet, life beyond the garden still held its usual storms. Sharp words, stressful days, unexpected disappointments. The real question was quietly forming in Elias's mind now. What would happen the next time the world tested his calm? Would the quiet he had discovered follow him beyond the garden gate? A few days later, Elias found himself in a place that used to stir his old habits. The small market in town was crowded, voices overlapping like restless birds. Someone bumped into him near the fruit stand and muttered something impatient. Years ago, that moment might have followed him the entire day, a tiny spark turning into a long, silent storm inside. For a second, the old reaction began to rise, that tight feeling in the chest, that quick defensive thought. But then, almost automatically, another memory appeared. The garden, the quiet soil beneath the weeds. Elias paused where he stood, one hand resting lightly on the wooden counter. No one noticed. The moment lasted barely a breath. He inhaled slowly, just as Mira had shown him. In his mind, he pictured loosening the soil around a stubborn root, not pulling it harshly, just softening the ground. The tension shifted almost immediately. The man beside him was already gone, lost in the noise of the market. The sharp feeling that had started to grow simply faded, not dramatically, not magically, just like a weed whose root had loosened in quiet soil. Later that afternoon, Elias returned to the garden again. The stone path had begun to reappear in several places. Patches of dark soil breathed beneath the sunlight, and here and there, small flowers peeked through the spaces where weeds once ruled. The garden wasn't perfect, but it was alive again. Mira arrived not long after and noticed the subtle changes right away. She walked slowly along the path, smiling at the returning patches of color. "Gardens respond quickly to attention," she said gently. Elias nodded, brushing dirt from his hands. "So do people, I suppose." He told her about the moment in the market, how he had paused, taken a breath, imagined loosening the soil. Mira listened quietly, clearly pleased. "You didn't fight the feeling," she said. "You simply gave it space to release." Elias looked around the garden, noticing how different it felt now. The same place, yet somehow lighter. The air seemed clearer, the colors softer, and inside him, the constant rush had slowed to something steadier. Not silence exactly, more like peaceful room to breathe. "Life will still bring weeds," Mira added with a small grin. "That's just how gardens work." Elias laughed softly, glancing at the soil beneath his feet. For the first time in years, that thought didn't trouble him. It simply meant he knew what to do next. One quiet afternoon, while the sun rested gently above the garden, Elias sat beside the stone path with Mira. The air carried that calm kind of silence that no longer felt uncomfortable to him. Birds hopped along the fence, and the soft scent of soil drifted upward. For a while, neither of them spoke, and strangely enough, that silence felt like a kind conversation. After a moment, Mira brushed a little dirt from her hands and looked at him thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "this garden has been teaching you something simple." Elias raised an eyebrow with a faint smile. "Something people often forget." She tapped the ground lightly with her finger. "You don't have to fix everything at once." Her voice was gentle, almost playful. "Sometimes the only thing a garden asks for is a minute of attention." She closed her eyes briefly and took a slow breath, in and out. Elias watched her, amused by the simplicity of it. "That's it?" he asked. Mira opened one eye and grinned. "That's it?" she said. "Most people underestimate what one quiet minute can do." She explained it like tending a small patch of soil. "Just pause wherever you are," she said. "Close your eyes if you like. Take one slow breath and imagine loosening the soil inside your chest." Her words drifted through the garden like soft wind. "If a feeling appears, irritation, sadness, embarrassment, just notice it. No pushing, no wrestling. Simply allow the breath to soften the ground around it. Most roots loosen on their own when the soil relaxes." She smiled toward the blooming flowers nearby. Elias thought about the market earlier that week, the quick breath, the quiet pause, the feeling that faded. He nodded slowly, realizing how simple the practice truly was. No complicated rituals, no dramatic effort, just one moment of honest stillness. Mira reached down and pulled a tiny weed from the soil with practiced ease. She held it up, then set it aside without ceremony. "That's all healing really is," she said softly. "A series of small moments where we stop running, moments when we return to the garden within." Elias looked around the once forgotten space, now slowly blooming again. The path was clearer, the flowers brighter, the soil richer with care. and it made him wonder how many people were still standing outside their own gates, unsure how simple the first step could be. The garden changed slowly, the way all real things do, not overnight, not with dramatic transformation, just a little more light reaching the soil each day, a few more stones of the path appearing from beneath the weeds, small signs that quiet attention had begun its work. Elias still visited every morning. Some days he pulled a few weeds, other days he simply sat on the old wooden stool Mira had brought, one slow breath in, one slow breath out, listening to the silence he once tried so hard to escape. The strange thing was that the garden didn't demand perfection. It didn't scold him for the years it had been forgotten. It simply responded to the care it was given now. New shoots rising where soil had been loosened, color returning where patience had been offered. And somewhere along the way, Elias realized something gentle but powerful. The garden had never truly been abandoned. It had simply been waiting for stillness to return, waiting for someone to stop rushing past the gate, waiting for a pair of quiet hands. Life outside the fence still moved the same as before. People said sharp things sometimes. Plans didn't always work out. Lonely evenings still appeared from time to time. But Elias carried the garden with him now. Whenever the world grew loud, he remembered the soil. Whenever a feeling tangled inside him, he imagined loosening the roots, not forcing them out, not pretending they weren't there, just giving them space to release in quiet, the way the garden had taught him. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Elias walked slowly along the restored stone path. The air smelled of fresh earth and soft blossoms. A breeze moved through the leaves like a quiet conversation. For a moment, everything felt deeply at ease, the kind of peace that arrives without being chased. Mira stood by the gate, watching the flowers sway gently. "You see," she said softly, almost to herself, "healing begins the moment we stop running from quiet." Elias nodded, brushing a bit of soil from his hands. The truth of it felt simple now. Beyond the garden, the world continued with all its noise and movement. But within the small fenced space behind the house, something important had been restored. Not just flowers or paths or tidy soil, something quieter, deeper, a place where stillness could always be found again. And if someone happened to stand at that gate one day, unsure, tired, carrying more inside than they realized, they might notice the open path leading inward, the gentle quiet waiting beyond the fence, the invitation hidden in the calm of the garden, a reminder that renewal often begins with a single quiet step.